just like to start off with a little question about what you think of our selection. For the N21 Film Festival, we've selected The Burbs and the show Eerie, Indiana. Do you approve of our selection?
The Burbs and what?
Eerie, Indiana.
Indiana. Well, I know they're actually thematically related, so that's very good.
Very much so, yes. We thought that they were. One of the key questions that a lot of our readers want to know is, what was the inspiration behind Eerie, Indiana?
Well, Eerie, Indiana was not my program per se. The people who created it, Jose Rivera and Carl. I can't remember Carl's name. These two guys, and they already had a script written, and they came to me and they said, "What do you think of this?" So I said a lot, and I made some suggestions. We made a pilot. Then we took it to NBC, and I remember being in the room when the head of the company watched it, and he didn't let on to us, but I saw him mouth the words "it's great" to somebody else. We got picked up, which was great. We got to make, I guess, it's sort of 2 seasons. It's really only 1 season, but we cut them in. There were 18 of them or 19 of them, and then they put us on opposite 60 Minutes, which is an American news show, which is the #1 top-rated show in America, and we just never got the numbers. And so at a certain point, they finally pulled the plug. And a couple of years later, the show started running on daytime on Fox TV, and kids Saturday morning kids found it, and it became very popular. But they only had 18 of them, and they said, "Well, we've got to have more of these." And it was now a couple of years later, so they couldn't go back to the same kids and continue those adventures. They decided to come up with an idea where, by using footage from the old show, they would introduce new kids, because these kids go into another time warp, a time dimension or whatever, in which they look different. And then they rebuilt the set in Canada and did it really, really cheap. And they ground out another, 25 episodes of this version of Eerie. Now, I don't know whatever happened to those, because they're really not very good.
On that note, I've been told that basically I have to try and convince you that Eerie, Indiana, the movie, should happen. Is there any way that I can make that the case? Is there anything I can say to you that's going to make this happen?
Certainly not to me. I mean, I'd be up for it in a minute. I thought it was a wonderful concept, and I think ahead of time. I think if the show had been come on a little later, I mean, it's Junior X-Files before X-Files,
right.
And I think it would be a very popular show if they revived it, even as a TV show. But as for a movie, the problem is that the show is not really that well known anymore. It hasn't really been run very often since 1990. And it just doesn't have the fan following to be able to justify.
It does in the UK. It does in the UK.
Well, we'll make it in the UK then.
Who do we talk to?
We'll reuse the Dark Shadows then.
Right, okay, we'll go on the phone.
It was owned and made by a company called Hearst, which I guess is involved with real Hearst. And it's out on video in America through some very obscure company. It's a whole box set. The problem is that in those days, the shows were filmed on film and edited on video, and the negatives were never cut. So the only thing that exists on the whole show is the old tapes, which have to constantly be up in order to be able to look as good as they can, high res. And there's only so much res they can do, and then they don't look that great. Even the ones on the video don't look that great.
Oh, excellent. Well, okay, well, we will do whatever it takes to get an Eerie, Indiana movie in the working, so,
Tell them I'm with you.
Okay, so we're going to make this happen. It's official news in the telepapers in the UK that this is happening. Okay, it's in pre-production as far as I'm concerned. Moving on slightly to The Burbs, which is our other film that we're showing. One question we had was whether or not your own childhood neighbourhood or growing up inspired anything that happened in The Burbs, or the kind of feeling or tones of The Burbs. Where did that come from?
One thing that was interesting while we were making the movie is that, of course, yes, in my neighborhood there was a house with people who were dead strange in it, and it was a popular neighborhood. And I think it was kind of an isolated incident, but when I started making the movie and talking to people, a large number of people had a house in their neighborhood that's occupied by people of strange lineage or odd parentage or strange behavior. And I think that may be one of the reasons that the picture remains so appealing to people, and even was at the time. I mean, it was a big surprise that the picture turned out popular. That's terrible reviews. I mean, mine has better reviews than the Suburb. I mean, that's just got the worst reviews on earth. But people like it. I go to a dentist's office and there's receptionists and say, "Oh, the Bird, yeah, I saw that. I love it. We watch it every or whatever." I mean, it has become a very popular.
There's a lot of reasons for that. I mean, I think that our house was actually the weird one in our neighbourhood, but we didn't do anything sinister, just for the record. We're just a bit weird. And just a bit of a serious question about the birds, actually, that somebody asked. You ready for a serious question about the birds?
If such a thing could exist, yeah.
Were you, as a director, concerned about reinforcing negative stereotypes about either weird people doing something sinister or suburban people being all paranoid?
Well, I have no problem reinforcing stereotypes about suburban people being paranoid. That's perfectly because they are. As far as feeling that we did bad to people who are actually burning people up in their ovens for the skulls, I don't know. I mean, that's a kind of approbation, I guess I could say. It's not behavior.
That's fair enough. You can't say fairer than that for the answer. We had a few questions about some of your other films, actually. Quite a few people wanted to say thank you for The Explorers and also ask why it's so overlooked. Do you have any idea why it's not as popular or well known as your other films?
Well, The Explorers is I often run into people who tell me how much they loved it and how much it was like their childhood, and that's all very nice to hear. The problem for me is that the movie was never finished. It was released by a studio that decided that they needed the movie out in the summer really quick, whether it was finished or not, and they just said stop working on it and put it out. So to me, it's very hard to watch. To me, it's like watching a rough cut. And there are things about the movie that I wish I could change, but I can't. And I think considering how unfinished or unfocused it is, that it's very gratifying that people find it so appealing. But it was a movie that needed more work and didn't get it, unfortunately. And because of that, of course, it didn't make much money at the box office. It didn't help that it came at the tail end of the cycle of teenage science movies that were coming out in 1995.
Well, despite all those problems that you came up against, it's still a film that holds a lot of love for people, a lot of love for. So I've been told officially to thank you for making that film. Another person I kind of want to ask you about, it's a personal question from me, is Dick Miller. I absolutely adore him in all your films, and I have to ask, where did you meet? Why does he appear in all your films? What's going on there?
Dick was an actor that I had seen when I was growing up watching movies by Roger Corman. And Dick was in a lot of those pictures, and sometimes he was a small part, sometimes he was a big part. But he was always fun and entertaining, and by the time I got to make my first movie for Roger, I had to have Dick Miller in it. In fact, he was probably one of the better known people who was in my first movie. And we hit it off, and we became friends. And so I thought, well, I enjoy working with this guy. I enjoy seeing his work up on the screen. I could just try to find him a part in every movie I ever get to do. And so every script I would get, I would for two reasons. One was to see if I wanted to make it, and two, if there was a part, big or small, for Dick Miller. Because he was the kind of actor who would take a small part, he'd do one scene part, do a whole supporting part, and he was happy to do it.
Another question that we had with regards to things that you've done in the past is somebody pointed out that you've worked both sort of on things like Gremlins and Small Soldiers, and they were interested in your views on puppets versus CGI. As a director, which is preferable, Joe? Tell us.
Well, I don't know if you can really put it in those terms. The puppets that I worked with were, at the time, state-of-the-art. Asking puppets to do in the Gremlins movies things that puppets had never done before, and we had to figure out ways of making them do it. And it was all very technical and very complicated, and it was frankly rather enervating working on the movie because the puppets took so much time that we eventually decided to shoot out the actors and just do the Gremlins stuff separately at the end of the show. And it took forever, and it was maddening. I mean, you have to do a take 6, 7 times, but does it look better when the eyebrows go up? Does it look better when the eyebrows go down? Can you even make the eyebrows go up and down at the same time? It was a movie that was defined by the technology that existed. And then when we got to make the sequel, the technology had moved forward. So now we could make Gizmo walk around, and we could have a gremlin that talked, and a gremlin that flew, and that was all great. But again, it was all on-set puppetry. Then CGI came in, and now you have actors looking at empty spaces, and you put the CGI in later. That's harder for actors to do, and it's also harder to shoot because you don't quite really know what you're photographing. On the other hand, you can now imagine anything, and you can make it look real on screen because the technology has improved so immensely. CGI. It has a tendency to be overused. If there's nothing in the shot but CGI, it tends to look cartoonish. There's some scenes in the new Avengers where it is clear that nothing in the frame is real. Everything has been done on the computer, and it doesn't quite match the scenes that have real people in it. Eventually, that will go away, and the technology will look how far it's come already in just a short time. I mean, it's eventually going to be a great technology. The only thing about it is that it's a little cold, and I think you have to try to measure it out carefully and use it where it can really be best, and not just sort of lean on it.
Yeah, I think, well, I'm with you on that. I'm an old school kind of girl myself. I'm all for the claymation and the puppetry, but CGI in the right places definitely works. Just whilst we're kind of vaguely on Gremlins territory, I'm not going to dare ask you about Gremlins 3 because you probably hear that question so many times. But
but you left out the G. It's always Gremlins 3D.
Indeed. I think the question I'm going to ask you about Gremlins is something that I think it speaks for a lot of people who saw it as a young person, and that's the story that Kate tells about her dad and the Santa Claus story. Where did that come from? It's absolutely fantastic.
Oddly enough, it was always in the script, although it wasn't Kate that said it. It was in an earlier version of the script. There was a scene where the Gremlins destroy a McDonald's, and the characters come in and they see that the people are all eating the none of the McDonald's food, and the guy who's the owner of the McDonald's is the guy who has that story. I liked the story. I didn't like the scene. And so when we did the rewrite, I asked Chris Columbus to give it to Phoebe Cates' character because she was kind of just the girl and she didn't have a backstory. And there really was something for her to play. And so I thought this was a really interesting story for her to tell. Because it's funny, but it's also not funny. Not funny to her, certainly, because it's Bobby's sick. But it's funny because it's absurd and it's my sense of humor. And so it's probably the one scene in the first movie that is the most personal for me because it's the kind of humor that I like. However, I was alone. None of the other people really thought it was funny. Phoebe liked it because she had something to do. But the editor told me it'll never be in the movie. The producer told me it'll never be in the movie. Warner Brothers saw it and they absolutely hated it. It was only because Steven Spielberg was being very supportive of the directors for the company Emblem. But he said, well, if Joe likes it, let's leave it in the preview and see how it does. So we had a preview, and it was a fantastically great preview. I mean, you never get a preview like this. And people were just on the field. Nobody had ever heard of this movie. It came from nowhere. Star, and it was just the right moment. And so after the preview, Warner Brothers was ecstatic. We're going to sell dolls now, and we're going to make a lot of money. And unfortunately, the one thing they wanted to do was to cut the scene with Phoebe. And they went to Steven and they said, is it okay if we cut the scene? And he said, well, Joe really likes it. I think we should keep it in. And they were just they thought for sure that the movie was a bomb. You had this scene in it, and people were going to hate it so much that they were going to actually use it.
Well, they were wrong. Very wrong.
To those of you who are attending the N21 Festival, I would like to say that I'm kind of flattered that you guys are going to look at two of my things. They're a little kind of closely related because they're both take place in The Burbs. The Burbs is a movie that I've always liked, and it's a kind of behavioral movie for me. It's shot during a writer's strike, and a lot of the stuff is made up, and therefore I think characters are what carries it. And Eerie, Indiana was a very cool series, I thought, that was ahead of its time, and any exposure that those old episodes can get is good for me, so I hope you guys have a good time with it.